Hello, good afternoon, and you're very welcome along to another RTÉ Rugby podcast. We're in between weeks 1 and 2 of the Heineken Champions Cup. I have got Bernard Jackman and Donal Lenihan here with me for this week's podcast. Two men who have just about warmed themselves up after last Sunday at Thomond Park, fellas.
Yeah, it was a bit of a strange experience. At least it was great. There was no doubt about the match going ahead. I have to say, we were talking before the match, fellas. We're talking about the fog and how thick it was. It wasn't quite as bad. I was able to go back a long time ago when Australia, the great Grand Slam team of 1984, came to Thomond Park, and the fog was so thick you literally couldn't see 10 yards in front of you. Eddie O'Sullivan claims he got a try in the corner, but nobody ever saw it. But so it wasn't quite that bad. Certainly the floodlights were a help.
It's like that old one, if Munster lose at Thomond Park and no one was there to see it, did it really happen, Birch?
Yeah, look at that. First, I think I certainly left Thomond Park reasonably positive about Munster, even though, to lose at home in the European Cup for them is a big blow. But I think we have to accept they're in transition, they're in a time of change. They don't have the tools, I think, in some positions, or certainly off the bench, to challenge the top 4 or 5. To beat the top 4 or 5, or to expect to beat them. They obviously could have beaten them, but I think over the course of this season, I didn't expect Munster to win the Champions Cup, to be honest. I think, but I think they're on the right track.
Yeah, we'll get on a little bit more onto them later on, but I'll start on Leinster because that's our game on RT this Friday night. I know both of you are going to be at it as well, and talk about a team coming right out of the blocks. They were narrow favourites to win in Le Havre against Racing. And I know the game had been moved from Paris and that was a slight advantage, but you throw in the travel chaos that Leinster had in getting there and the fact that they're just also up against a really, really good side away from home. A 42-10 win is about as emphatic as it could possibly be, Donal.
Yeah, look, you set your stall out at the start of the tournament, playing Racing away from home. On paper, looked like a difficult challenge. I think it probably was a help, the fact that they were able to take it out of Paris because of that concert. But what I love about Leinster is this no excuse culture. It was documented in advance of the game about the 12 or 13 hour delays hanging around Dublin Airport. I think when they got into, when their flight arrived, there was difficulties in even getting transferred to the team hotel. But the minute Leo Cullen was interviewed before the match, in terms of the difficulties they had encountered, I mean, he was the personification of calm, firstly. And he made it very clear, look, that, there's no excuses here. We knew what to expect. The game starts and that's it. And maybe Racing might have felt that Leinster were put out by the difficulties of the previous 24 hours. But, Leinster's first 4 minutes of the game were just so clinically brilliant. I think Racing gave away 3 penalties in that opening period.
Yeah.
Leinster, had a playoff maul initially, had another line-out maul within 5 metres. I mean, it was so clinically executed. Leinster running back from that Andrew Porter try, you could see they were up for the game, and you could almost sense the sense of shock in the Racing players' faces. I mean, if you make a statement early on, that's the way to do it. But, as you said yourself, you go away from home, you score 6 tries, you win by a margin of 32 points against a team who are currently second in the top 14. And we all know what a brute force that tournament is. It's an incredible statement to launch a new campaign.
Yeah, Leinster were excellent, Birch, but I mean, talk about playing into the opposition's hands. Donal mentioned it there, 3 penalties inside the first 4 minutes. I remember looking at the game. Finn Russell had the first 2 touches of the ball for Racing. He kicked off the ball, 3 penalties and a try later. He restarted the game again and they were 7-0 down. And I mean, it just got worse from there. 15 penalties to 5 in Leinster's favour throughout the course of the game. Like, Leinster were excellent, but God, Racing put it on a plate for them.
I know it was very, very disappointing. Especially, we've seen French teams have complete brain farts, like Racing did, but we didn't expect Racing to do it because they are a team who do pride themselves on Europe and have been very close to winning one and have the experience both on and off the pitch, to be better than that. And it was like they were over anxious or overly pumped up. The first penalty for a high tackle, then getting their maul detail wrong. Even the maul try for Porter, that finished off that first sequence. I mean, their line of defense there was, they blasted, the wrong hole, and allowed Leinster peel off. So they were just seemed to be. Yeah, I doubt they weren't up for it, but it kind of manifested itself like that. It was maybe just a little bit of fear factor trying to impress Stuart Lancaster. I don't know, but it was an untypical Racing performance in Europe, to be fair. Now, credit to Leinster, they were unbelievably accurate. You said 15 lineouts, 15 penalties, which gave Leinster a total of 25 lineouts, and they won 25 from 25. But it wasn't just winning it; it was what they did with it off that, and the variety of plays to get them back on the front foot and keep their foot on Racing's throat. It was near perfect. It was near perfect, and even someone like Charles Natai, Charlie Natai, like, people were wondering why Leinster signed him, but when Robbie Henshaw's out, he is incredibly capable. We've seen him play fullback this year. He's not flashy, but like a lot of the line-out strike plays were around him, being that guy taken to the line with the options to play out the back or short, and he just does it perfectly. And a good piece of recruitment. Jason Jenkins, we've talked about this pod before. They're two guys who've come in, and then you see guys like Baird, who's come through the academy now, looking like he's the player we all hoped he was. Dan Sheehan, phenomenal. Porter as a loose head. James Ryan back to his best. So they're in a really good place, and they lay down a marker in a competition that looks like there's not as much depth to it as maybe there was 4 or 5 years ago, but it's still going to be very hard won. But yeah, they lay down a marker for sure.
I think there was a huge amount of frustration last year with the way the pool stage went, Donal, and that game against Montpellier that they had to forfeit, and it's something that Leo Cullen has brought up unprompted about 5 or 6 times since in the 12 months that have passed. But in the last few weeks, they've looked like a side that are kind of playing with a bit of a chip on their shoulder, which maybe they mightn't have in the past. Yeah,
well, look, I mean, Munster had about 20 years in Europe playing with a chip on their shoulder. It worked for them for a long, long time, so it helps. You got to find a cause at the start of every year. Yeah. Look, there's no doubt the manner in which they lost the final last year, losing to a try and with a minute or 2 minutes to go. You have the whole scenario around Johnny Sexton finishing up after a brilliant career with Leinster, Stuart Lancaster moving on, the final in the Aviva. I mean, there's a strong possibility that if you finish in the top seedings, that Leinster could play a round of 16, a quarter, a semi, and a final in Dublin. So that incentive is there. Going back to the specifics of Saturday's game, like Birch mentioned, variety and all that, and that's Leinster just keep on evolving, so that opposition do their work on them. They think they have them sussed in a certain area, and then they do something different. But even peel it back from that, the most impressive thing for me was Leinster came into this game. You could arguably say without 3 of their most influential players in Ty Furlong, Johnny Sexton, Robbie Henshaw. They've all been, test selections for Lions when they've been on Lions tours. But Leinster just carried on seamlessly. You wouldn't have noticed that they weren't there. Even like Ross Byrne has taken a lot of stick over the last few years, but every time he steps into that role with Leinster, they just carry on seamlessly. And that's, I think, a tribute to him. People spoke about the Australia game when he came in. He got that winning penalty, but I kind of compartmentalize place kicking in some ways, in that that's something that he's always been really good at. But the manner with which he orchestrated Leinster on Saturday, I think, was really impressive. And I think he's because of he hasn't been able to translate that, let's say, on the international stage. It's almost as if he doesn't get the credit that he deserves when he's playing with Leinster. But even subtle things, like Birch mentioned, the line-out, 25 out of 20 to 5 is phenomenal. But there's also the variety in terms of early on, they drove that maul. They had Racing guessing all the time. Do we keep our troops on the ground? And then when they thought they were doing that, you saw them doing things off the top of the lineup. You saw say Van der Fleer or Dan Sheehan were coming in the scrum half position, so that Gibson Park was almost a playmaker from 10. So that enabled them to get a little bit wider earlier on. Things, subtle changes that certainly seem to catch Racing on the hoop. And but the most impressive thing then is when you are on top, they just kept the pedal to the floor. I mean, to win against Racing by 32 points was a phenomenal achievement.
And it's Birch, it's like it's taking advantage of the openings that Racing are giving you as well. Obviously, we've spoken about the penalties, but they had 2 yellow cards during the game as well, Racing. And in that 20-minute block, Leinster were 15 on 14. They scored 28 points.
Yeah.
28 of their 42. Like, that is just fully taking advantage of any little opening an opposition is going to give you.
Yeah, they're absolutely ruthless. And even the try from Ringrose, like Racing defend with Finn Russell at 13, and Leinster went after him, and it took him the fourth attempt. It was the one just before half time where he previously been beaten on the inside by James Lowe, but Racing recovered, the scramble got him. But in his mind, he got very narrow, and next thing he was beaten on the outside. And Leinster, like how many times we see teams make a line break like that but not finish, and most teams go to the outside, but James Lowe hunted back on the inside and gave a delightful pass to Garry Ringrose. Like, they just, every little error you make, they seem to take advantage of it. And for a team, like, you could see on the Racing players' faces, the frustrations, that they had, and with errors they're making, with their indiscipline. And, but Leinster put you in that place where you feel like everything's against you. You know what I mean? So I would give Leinster credit for that as well. And look, the reality is, because it was such a convincing performance, you still can't go right. They're the finished article. They're guaranteed to win it, but they are showing all the right signs. Again, now, in fairness, let's be honest. This time last year, they were, maybe in January, February, some of their form was outstanding as well. So until they have that trophy, I think they'll take no comfort in the fact they're playing great rugby. Yeah,
I mean, it's almost a compliment to Leinster that you can't actually really judge anything about them until May or June. But on some of the individuals, someone you mentioned there, Garry Ringrose, he seems to have brought his game to another level entirely this season, where he's really producing the big moments on the big days, like a brilliant try there the other day against Racing, but against Ulster, coming up with those 2 tries in the second half to just completely flip the game on its head. And we saw earlier on, he's captaining the side now on a regular occasion if Johnny's away. He seems to have stepped up his game, both in terms of the performances, but also probably from the leadership side of things.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. He looks like, I mean, he was a player maybe 2 or 3 years ago. You wouldn't have ever seen him in the captaincy role. But look, the game has evolved so much now. The days of the captain sort of being in charge of everything. It's a collective effort. Different players have different responsibilities for different areas on the field, be it defence, calling the line out, whatever. But Ringrose is one of those guys who's just sort of leading by example in terms of he does some brilliant things. But for me, it's his work rate, his honesty. I mean, there was a period in the game, if you remember, there was a long kick down into the corner. He chased, I think, was it Legarrick or someone he put under huge pressure to block the kick. Just this phenomenal commitment. I mean, he nearly knocked his head off. He tried to cover a tackle in the far corner. And he now looks, he has so much time on the ball when he's in possession. I mean, he's matured into this brilliant player. It's the consistency levels that he brings. Without question, he's been the sort of standout, most consistent performer with Leinster this year. Incredibly unlucky not to have gone on a Lions tour at this stage of his career, but he's just getting better and better.
Yeah, and for someone, Bert, who isn't necessarily the biggest player in the world, he packs an enormous amount into every tackle he puts in.
Yeah, there's a real edge to him for such a, I suppose, gentleman off the field, which he is. He's competitive. He puts his body on the line. He works incredibly hard. He's probably all the behaviours that Lancaster and Cullen want the typical Leinster player to have, and he shows them, day in, day out, and he's just in incredible form. I mean, when Leinster needed him against Ulster, the chips were down. He scored 2 tries, and the weekend just against Fiku, who's a top class operator. I mean, there's no contest. Ringrose was the best centre on the field, and I think there's more in him. There's more in him, and I know, speaking to people in Leinster, they see him as being the natural successor to Johnny as captain with Leinster. Does that lead to being captain of Ireland? You wouldn't bet against it.
Yeah, certainly
I
not.
tell you, Bert, you reminded me, just watching him on Saturday and then going down to Thomond on Sunday. Like, we all know Antoine Dupont, and we probably talk about him in the Leinster and the Munster game. But it's the stuff, the unglamorous stuff, the consistent work, the chasing of kicks, the sort of covering the backfield to field the high bombs that Dupont did on Sunday, outside of all the brilliant things. But Ringrose now has that honesty to his game as well. And if you're playing with him, I mean, it gives a team a massive lift to have a player who is, he just shows that level of commitment to everything that he does. And no, it's phenomenal, really, given how good he was, that he could raise his game up another 10% as he has done consistently this year. Yeah,
he's certainly a player in tremendous form. On this Friday, Gloucester coming to the RDS. That game's going to be live on RT2 and RT Player. You'll both be there. What Birch? What can we expect from Gloucester? Like, if you're looking at the Premiership table, they're doing okay. Is it 5-4 after 9 games? They've kind of had a few highlight wins, a few disappointing defeats. Like, they seem to be a side who can raise and lower themselves to various levels.
Yeah, they made good progress last year under Skivington. And a lot of people thought them, be a top 4 team this year, and they may end up being a top 4 team. But they play a good brand of rugby. To be honest, attack wise, they are quite dangerous. They play for each other. I thought they were good in the comeback. They had a very poor start against Bordeaux, but showed a lot of composure. But Bordeaux's away record this year is shockingly bad. So I'd say some of that was down to Bordeaux just pulling up in front, to be honest. It's very difficult to see them. There's rumours they may come with a second string. I don't think they would realistically have any aspiration, any real belief that they could win the Champions Cup. And we've seen some English teams come over here fully loaded and go home with their tails between the legs. And I think, from a coaching point of view, is this something that should he be better off actually sending some youngsters and effectively doing what Petty did last year, which is throw the game, but tell the players, look, we know it's going to be very difficult. We know it's an opportunity for individuals to get a chance, but not blow their heads by getting hammered. And Montpellier did that and ended up bouncing back and winning the top 14. So, and everyone was like, oh, how could you recover from a 70-point loss or whatever it was? But yeah, you can, if you actually set the scene that this isn't a game we're gonna hang our hats on. And I don't know, English teams generally don't do that, but it's something he's going to have to consider, because I don't see how Gloucester could realistically think they can beat Leinster this weekend, given the kind of mixed form they're in and what Leinster are putting out.
But also as well, like, I mean, it's obviously a quirk and a folly of the pools we have at the moment, where it's 2 big pools of 12 and 8 go through. As you say, they could send out a second string against Leinster and get absolutely hockeyed. But if they were to pick up, target that last game against Bordeaux and get a win there, 2 wins probably gets you into a top 8 and gives you a pretty strong shot at being in the last 16.
Yeah, but it's an indictment of the competition then, isn't it? I have to say, I'm not a fan of this format. I much preferred when the pool was 6, go straight into your quarterfinal. I know, obviously, look, you're talking about a global calendar and trying to reorganize the whole season. If you like, Europe has shown the way by shedding one round. Like the round of 16 is only 1 game this year. It's not 2 games. But I think it just doesn't sit well with me that you're in the second game of a 4-game pool and you could very probably send your second team over. You know, you shouldn't
also, by the way, having won your first game, it's not as if they're it's not as if they're throwing the competition here.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I watched the game obviously with commentary duty Friday night. I sat down, I watched the Gloucester game, and I mean, if I'm honest, I wasn't overly impressed with them. As Birch had said, Bordeaux's away form has been very poor, but yet they sort of raced into a lead. It was almost as if they couldn't believe they found themselves in that position. Gloucester came back, to be fair to them. They showed character, but then they're playing in front of the shed. They have a fantastic support in Gloucester, and they fought their way back into the game, and there's great credit due to them for that. But look, I would have thought it's a great opportunity. Come over to Dublin, play against Leinster. Skivington, his first comment after the game was, "Well, look, we're playing against the Irish international team." So I think he sort of set out his stall on the game almost immediately in the press conference after winning their opening game. But look, I think we've all we appreciate that the tournament is in a bit of a flux at the moment in terms of the way that it's been rejigged and reorganised. A lot of people find it very difficult to follow the format, in that, let's say, Munster played Toulouse last week. They'll play them in their last game away, but they go on to play Northampton, and Toulouse go off and play somebody else. Do you know what I mean? It's a difficult format to follow in some degrees. And but look, I've always been a massive fan of Europe. I still think there is, when the change happened a couple of years ago, and it was driven by the French and the English in particular, the changes haven't worked. But look, I think we might have a sort of a holding position until such time as World Rugby finally attacked this whole thing about a global calendar. I mean, we have the South African teams now in Europe, yet their international players are coming back having played in a rugby championship. It's like playing the Six Nations in July and August and then going straight into the November series. I mean, they can't continue like that. Something has to give. So look, that'll be for the administrators down the road. Sorry about that. That'll be for the administrators down the road. But look, it is having an impact on the tournament right now, and it just doesn't sit well for me. I mean, that Gloucester might be considering sending a second team. That Montpellier game that Bert spoke about last year was an absolute farce.
Yeah.
80 points. It did nothing for the image of the tournament.
No, certainly didn't. Moving back to Munster. So Toulouse at the weekend, we kind of touched on it at the top of the show, and like it is quite strange when you're coming away from Munster losing a game in the Champions Cup at Thomond Park, and we're talking a lot about the positives from the game. Like I know it probably speaks to the transition Munster are in at the moment and all that, but like, Donal, if you're to explain to us, we'll say, for maybe someone who didn't watch too much of it and just saw Munster lose at Thomond Park, and we're talking about positive, like, what were the positives? What are the silver linings in what we saw at the weekend?
Well, look, just in terms of the game itself, I mean, if I'm honest, I thought the game went exactly the way that I had felt that it would go in advance of the game. I mean, Munster were always going to put it up to Toulouse. I thought they were outstanding in that opening 20 minutes. But the power game, the strength that Toulouse had on the bench was always going to impact on the outcome at the end. And you could see Toulouse, even though, let's say it was a narrow win at the end, they were absolutely thrilled. The positives that came out of it, you look at it, there was an expectation that the Munster scrum would come under a lot of pressure. It was under pressure at times. They conceded one or two penalties. But even when the big changes came in the second half, when Toulouse had the facility to bring in Cyril Boy and Charlie Famuina, to be fair, I thought Munster held up their end well there. Opening 20 minutes from an attacking perspective, again, I think the variety that we saw in attack, the ability to get the ball into the wider channels quicker and earlier, is there. It was there, quite visible early on. The problem for Munster is, if they don't control the territory, if they don't get that foothold in the opposition 22, then they find it difficult. And I think if you look at the way Toulouse, they obviously felt that. Toulouse just booted the ball. 70 metres down the field all day. They put this white line across the pitch and tackled everything. I also felt there was an element early on as if Toulouse, I won't say they sat back, but they certainly absorbed everything that Munster threw at them, apart obviously from the Joey Carberry try after 10 minutes. And I think they just worked out that if they could play to their strengths up front, play territory, that they'd eventually win the game. But there's no shame in losing Toulouse by a couple of points. Munster are judged on a standard of years ago that they're not quite at. I mean, I would agree with Birch in terms of I think there's 3 or 4 standout teams in Europe now. Munster are in that layer below that. I don't think they're going to be winning the Heineken Cup this year. So therefore, it's a question of maximising your return from your home games. And, I'd expect Munster. I think they're good enough to beat Northampton home and away. So therefore, hopefully they could well be qualified for the round of 16 prior to going to Toulouse in that last game. And I think, that's their goal. I think Munster's ambition in this tournament at the moment is to get that home round of 16 for all kinds of reasons, not least financial. But stay in the tournament as long as you can. Keep exposing the younger players. I mean, you have the likes of Coombs and Hodnett, these guys, Craig Casey starting, Jack Crowley coming in. There is more younger players being exposed now. So, I mean, they would have been the positives from my perspective.
And Birch, is the next challenge from a Munster point of view, as Donal mentioned, the Northampton game's coming up, and he's saying there's no reason why Munster can't go to Northampton this weekend anyway and get the win. Is the next challenge for them now to be winning those games where they are just about favoured, or those kind of coin flip games where it's one thing putting it up to Toulouse when it's backs to the walls and there's no issue geeing yourself up for it, but those games that you just about should be winning that are maybe just a bit more than a coin flip.
Yeah, and in fairness, I think they did against Connacht at home. They did against Edinburgh. Toulouse were favourites, and justifiably so. And Munster put them under pressure to win. Northampton, I think Munster will win in Northampton. I just think from Munster point of view, I'm gutted to see John Ryan sign for the Chiefs. To be honest, I think that's putting a huge amount of pressure on Roundtree. And while the scrum was good at the weekend, I think having him there to start is a help. It settles everyone down. And particularly against a French side, if you can show solidity there early in the game, it can generally last the whole game. And I'd just be worried. Salanoa came on and did really well. Particularly he's a more explosive ball carrier than John Ryan, but that's going to put them under pressure. I to be honest, maybe I was naive, but I just took it as a given that they would find a way of keeping him for the rest of the season. And when it comes to the crunch later on, you go down to South Africa in the URC, and maybe you need one win out of 2. I think they're a little bit light there. They're a little bit light there, and I understand there's financial constraints, and I understand that they let him go and they got him back fortuitously because of what happened in Wasp. But and it's a great opportunity for him. I totally understand that, to play Super Rugby. What was it? Claw, Rob Carney. We haven't had many. There's probably a couple more, but we haven't had many Irish players who played Super Rugby. It's a great opportunity, but I don't think that helps Graham Roundtree. Later on in the year.
No, you're
absolutely right. The thing that annoys me, about the business around John Ryan, firstly, you should never have been a left go in the first place. Yeah. That was at the end of last year. So therefore you had all issues in terms of the budget and balancing the budget and all that. But if you don't have a scrum in Europe, you've nothing. And particularly with the South African teams coming into URC, it has an impact there as well. That's the first thing. The second thing is when obviously with Wasp going into administration, John Ryan became available overnight. In my mind, Munster should have tied him up for the season there and then. They gave him a 3-month contract. So therefore, even that was only a half commitment. Because he had a 3-month contract, and I don't know this for certain, but I would imagine he had already agreed to play for the Barbarians in those games against the All Blacks 15.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to use that to put him, rightly so, to put him in the shop window. So therefore, when Munster were playing the South African team down in Park Equive, John Ryan wasn't available that night. He was away with the Barbarians. And it's almost, look, you reap what you sow. Angus Tuiova has got injured in the Chiefs. John Ryan played with some New Zealand players for the Barbarians in 2 games and against the New Zealand 15 in that game. So all of a sudden, when the Waikato Chiefs needed a tight head prop, somebody came up, oh, geez, your man John Ryan, who's available, is really impressive. So therefore, had Munster tied him up for the year, obviously he wouldn't have been available. Had they not agreed to let him go to play for the Barbarians when he should have been playing down in Park Equive, then this wouldn't have come up. So Munster are the architects of their own downfall in this. And I agree 100% with Birch. I think this will come back to bite them in the arse by the end of the season, because he brings that solidity to the tight head side of the scrum. You've Stephen Archer has been out injured for a while. Salanoa and Caelan Knox are a work in progress. But if you're starting one of those, there's no question the bigger packs are going to target you early on. That gives you the opportunity to paint a picture for the referee in terms of early dominance, and it's hard to come back from that. Whereas when you start with a solid platform and you work from there, it's totally different. So I'd say privately, Graham Rowntree must be seething that Munster have allowed this happen.
Yeah, and Birch, obviously the other thing as well is, okay, Stephen Archer is coming back to fitness soon, so they'll get one back. But again, they're only one tight head injury away from having to go out and try find an emergency signing all over again.
Yeah, it's madness, to be honest. And I really feel for Rowntree and the coaching staff and the Munster fans, because this was, as Donal said, this was an error that was made last year, and they actually got a kind of a joker card that they could have got themselves out of it and have missed the opportunity. And I understand there's financial elements involved, financial reasons behind it, but I still think we want all our provinces to be able to put their best foot forward and give them the tools to compete. And in this situation here, Munster could end up playing one hand behind their back later on in the year if Archer gets another setback.
Yeah, and you say the tools to compete. I mean, we're all thrilled to see the way that Munster are looking to expand their game. We're all, I think there's, even within the players, there's a lot of positivity around the coaching staff. Mike Prendergast, we've spoken about on many occasions in terms of what he's trying to do in attack. But Mike Prendergast can't do anything if the scrum is running backwards and you're trying to play off that. It's just an impossibility. Like, you've got to get your basics right. And Munster have left the door open there in terms of the way this whole John Ryan thing has been handled.
Yeah, and we'll have to just wait and see how that one goes over the next few months. So that's Munster against Northampton Sunday afternoon. Saturday evening is Ulster at home against La Rochelle. Well, we think it's at home against La Rochelle as of this morning. I don't know, fellas, did you see the Irish Independent? Rory O'Connor is reporting, he is an exclusive, that there are doubts the game could actually be played at Kingspan Stadium. The pitch is apparently frozen at the moment, and the weather isn't necessarily going to be getting any warmer anytime soon. I think it might be going up to 2 or 3 degrees maybe in the next couple of days. So there are doubts as to whether that can be played at Kingspan Stadium. They're looking at possible alternatives. It could be moved to a Sunday game if they think the pitch can be thawed out. If not, they might end up having to play it at the RDS. So, Birch, that just throws another spanner into the works from an Ulster point of view after what's been a completely chaotic 10 days.
Yeah, just it might save them the shame of having to run out in front of their home fans who were pretty disappointed with what happened last week. But yeah, look, it's a tough fixture anyway. It's going to be so interesting to see if they bounce back. I did fear for them going up the road after the RDS, just the nature of the way that game unfolded, how that would affect them mentally and the knock the confidence it would give them. And then, but to be honest, I actually expected them to beat Sale. I thought there'd be a real reaction, and there was nothing. And Sale are a good team. Alex Anderson's done a good job, and they've got some very good players. But to not score a point, to concede that many, was worrying. And McFarland, in fairness, as a coach, he's saying, look at, we've had two bad. He didn't even say we've had a bad 60 minutes and a bad 80 minutes. Don't be too hard on us, but certainly they need a reaction. And if that game is taken away from Ravenhill, I mean, it's certainly even more of an advantage to La Rochelle, because Ravenhill is a very difficult place to go. So I'd say they'll do everything in their power to get that game played there. Can they bounce back? Look, they're too good to be shipping 38 points to get against anybody, but it's a test of their character as much as their skill or talent.
Donal, Dan McFarland has been at pains not to use it as an excuse, and he's been asked about it a couple of times since the game on Sunday, and he's completely tried to push it out to performance and putting it on themselves. But the travel chaos they had in getting to Manchester on Sunday, considerably worse than what Leinster had to endure on Friday going over to France. They were hours and hours in the air in Belfast Airport on Saturday evening, couldn't get their flight. It was eventually cancelled. In the end, you had players getting out of bed at 4:30 on Sunday morning to go and fly over to Manchester, some to Birmingham, get on a bus for 2 hours and travel up to the game. I mean, does that explain a performance like that in some way? I'm not talking about does it completely cover it, but surely that has an impact on the preparation.
Yeah, look, of course, it's a mitigating factor, but and it's a reason for what happened, but it's a reason then that you can turn into an excuse if that is your mindset. I know we mentioned earlier on Leinster, no excuse culture. I think Andy Farrell within Ireland has a no excuse culture. I go back to New Zealand. I stayed in the same hotel as Ireland in Wellington, in Auckland in that first week when players were dropping with COVID, when some of the coaching staff had COVID, when they picked up 3 injuries in the first game against the Maori alone. There are reasons for you not to perform or not to turn up. But Andy Farrell actually saw that as a positive, because these are things that can happen in a World Cup. You can lose 5 players, as Ireland did in 2015 on the eve of a quarter-final. So this is a test of your character. Of course, given the chaos that Ulster had, there was a reason for them to perform, maybe not to perform at their optimum, but to flip it to a case. 39, what's worse, conceding 39 or scoring none? The worry that I have for Ulster, and you go back over the last 3 or 4 years, every time you think they're on the verge of doing something, every time there is an element of expectation surrounding where Ulster are, they seem to fall flat on their faces. We've seen it numerous times. You go back last year, Champions Cup, they have that win away against Toulouse, conceded try in the last minute, given this is the round of 16, home and away average. They're in a great position in Ulster the following week. But you always felt in the back of your head that Ulster will find a way to lose this. And that's exactly what they did. They ended up, 49-50 was the average score in that round of 16 last year. They came to the RDS a couple of weeks ago. Brilliant run of form. The only team they'd lost to was Ulster. Cian Healy gets sent off after 20 minutes. You're leading by 19 points. You just can't, teams that have aspirations to win silverware can't let situations like that run away from them. So therefore, for me, there's something missing. I have great time for McFarland. I look at that Ulster backline, all young academy guys. They've been doing brilliantly. They've beefed up front. Obviously the intent is there, and they've been unlucky. Rory Sutherland got injured. They've bought kits off for next year. So they're addressing areas that they may have seen as potential weaknesses. But if they don't address this mental thing, whereby just when they're in tipping point of really doing something well, they seem to take 2 steps backwards. And I think that is sort of sitting at the back of their heads at the moment.
Donal mentioned Cian Healy's red card in that Leinster game, Birch, and Andy Warwick of Ulster has been cited this week for his tackle on Manu Tuolangi. Very, very similar tackles, even down to the stance of the player, the way the the way Tuolangi was running at Warwick in comparison to how Tom Stewart was running at Cian Healy. So on the pitch on Sunday, Matthew Raynell decided it was nothing more than what I think was nothing more than a penalty, or nothing more even than the scrum that was awarded. It's going to be really, really interesting. Whatever your view of both incidents are, it's actually going to be really interesting to see what decision comes of this sighting now. If you bear in mind, Cian Healy was cleared of that red card last week, because they're very, very similar incidents.
Yeah, they are. To be honest, I was surprised Keane was cleared. I thought on the pitch that was a red card. So the fact that the Warwick has been cited would lead me to believe that there was sufficient doubt around that. So it is going to be interesting. I mean, but again, if he is banned, it's just inconsistency. You know, we're not getting any real clear trends in how to deal with head-high contact, and regardless of intent, you know. And that's the surprising thing for me is that we're 2 years into this real focus now on making the game safer, and we see decisions made or not made that aren't consistent. So it's another. I thought at the time Warwick could have got red, to be honest. I should have got red. But then because of the Healy thing, I was having a doubt about it. You know what I mean? But now he's cited. It makes you believe that someone feels that there was legitimate seriousness in it to warrant another look.
Yeah, and people can be quick to criticize a referee in circumstances like this, Donal. But I was covering that game, and Matthew Raynell, he's going through it, and he's listing off the various mitigating factors, and he is pretty much giving a bullet point by bullet point copy and paste version of the mitigating factors from Cian Healy last week. So in theory, Matthew Raynell and his officials, they're being consistent with a decision from last week, but 2 days later the inconsistency crops up again when the sighting comes up.
Yeah, and I think this is an issue for referees. I spoke to one international referee coming back from the summer series, and in some respects they feel they've been held out to dry because, you know, as you say, they have a clear sort of code of conduct in terms of the way that they address all these collisions. Now, to be fair, I didn't see the Warwick Tuolangi one, so I can't comment on it. But and I'm not doing an Arsene Wenger there. I just didn't get to see. I only saw the highlights of the Ulster game. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult for referees. But look, the bottom line is, I think we have got to a stage now where any head-on-head, you're almost this whole player welfare thing. You're looking at player education, dropping heights, and all that type of thing. So therefore, when you bring back in the grey areas, like there was a suggestion that there were mitigating circumstances around the reduction of Cian Healy's red card, but they never actually told us what they were. So that in itself creates doubt. And that, if they came out and said this is exactly why we're pulling back on the red card, then you might understand it. Like from a commentary perspective, you're in the match there, you're trying to give your opinion of what happens. The whole process takes so long anyway, because you have the dialogue between the TMO and the referee and the assistants. You know, it's not perfect, but look, I think we have to accept that there is a process here, whereas we're trying to take the danger out of the tackle area. And look, if you're going to err, then I think you have to err on the side of doing what's right in terms of player welfare.
Mm-hmm. You go along those lines, Birch?
100%. I think we can't go into a World Cup with pundits, supporters, players, coaches being able to look back at an incident and not be sure how it's going to be refereed or decided upon. I think that's the next step for World Rugby.
And ultimately, it's not fair on the referees either.
No, it's very hard to referee. The game is incredibly hard to referee, and we're as a sport, we're making it even harder, which is madness.
But I mean, just on that point, I'll go back. The second test in Dunedin, Ireland, New Zealand, when you had do you remember you had the yellow cards against the New Zealand tight head prop, then you had the sending off, then you had Ardy Savea being taken off. There was the uncertainty then, do you go down to 13? because there was an uncontested scrum for a period of about 3 or 4 minutes in the game. Then you had the fourth official deciding that RTÉ Surveyor couldn't go back on when the yellow card period was up. So, like, it's complex enough for people who were in the game all your lives. Imagine the casual observer who's interested in sport. He's watching the game, and yet you have all this uncertainty. And that particular incident was one where certainly the referees felt hung out to dry there, because it was totally unclear what was going on. I mean, that shouldn't be the case.
No, certainly shouldn't. Finally, fellas, before we finish up, just quickly, there's probably not much we can kind of talk about it at the moment because there's an appeal ongoing. But Birch, obviously, yesterday, French Rugby Federation President Bernard Laporte, one of the most influential people in the game, he was given a 2-year suspended prison sentence yesterday, just under a year out from the World Cup after a court ruled he showed favoritism in awarding a shirt sponsorship contract to Altrad, who are obviously sponsoring France and the All Blacks as well. Like, ultimately, this casts an enormous shadow on everything that's happening in French and World Rugby in the next 12 months, but ultimately over the World Cup.
Yeah, the World Cup will be tarnished, or the fact that they won the bid, but it'll drive on. You know, France will host the World Cup. It'll be a cracking World Cup, and people will forget about it. And in France, to be honest, my experience of situation like this will be, he'll be lauded as a bit of a hero because he's got France on track to have a host World Cup, and obviously as a national team, they're performing at a level that they hadn't performed about since he was actually, well, better than he was when he was coach, but they were very strong when he was a coach. So he's a fascinating individual in that he was a successful coach with France, with Toulon. He was a minister for sport, and then he bounced back into, you know, the sport administration or rugby administration, and got the right people around him and made a clear plan to get French rugby back to the top of the world, or at the top of the world. Maybe they were never there, and obviously part of that was getting a home World Cup. But the clubs and the federation now are aligned. The TV deals are in place, etc., etc. The national team is given priority, whereas probably when I was there with Grenoble, the clubs were given the priority. So he has done a huge amount. Unfortunately, it's sad to see that some of it was done in a corrupt manner if the suspension holds. And yeah, but I don't think in France, I mean, in France it's amazing. I noticed that people who break the law and cut corners tend to not be seen as being not worthy, but actually sometimes get to the top very quick.
Yeah. Excuse me, 100%, and I'm sure we're going to be reading and hearing a lot more about it over the next few months. Donal Lenihan, excuse me, Bernard Jackman, thanks a million for joining us. Just as my voice is about to go, we've timed it well. Fellas, thanks a million for joining us, and enjoy yourself this weekend. We'll speak to you again soon.
See you. Bye bye.
Cheers.